what's up? Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and we're reading An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz in the middle of Chapter 1. Remember, if you like what you hear, if you like the episode, if you like the book, hit the like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you get notified when I make a new video. Shall we dig in? The ancestral Puebloans of Chaco Canyon on the Colorado Plateau in the present-day Four Corners region of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah thrived from AD 850 to 1250. Ancestors of the Pueblos of New Mexico, they constructed more than 400 miles of road radiating out from Chaco, averaging 30 feet wide. These roads followed straight courses even through difficult terrain such as hills and rock formations. The highways connected some 75 communities. Around the 13th century, the ancient Puebloans abandoned the Chaco area and migrated, building nearly 100 smaller agricultural city-states along the northern Rio Grande Valley and its tributaries. Northernmost Taos Pueblo was an important trade center handling buffalo products from the plains, tropical bird products, copper and shells from Mexico, and turquoise from New Mexican mines. Pueblo trade extended as far west as the Pacific Ocean, as far east as the Great Plains, and as far south as Central America. Other major peoples in the region, the Navajos, Diné, and Apaches, are of Athabascan heritage, having migrated to the region from the subarctic several centuries before Columbus. The majority of the Diné people did not migrate and remain in the original homeland in Alaska and northwestern Canada. Originally a hunting and trading people, they interacted and intermarried with the Pueblos and became involved in conflicts between villages engendered by disputes over water usage, with Diné and Apache groups allied with one or another of the riverine city-states. The island peoples of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Basin were an integral part of the cultural, religious, and economic exchanges with the peoples from today's Guyana, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. Quite a mouthful. Water, far from presenting a barrier to trade and cultural relations, served as a means of connecting the region's peoples. Pre-colonial Caribbean cultures and cultural connections have been very little studied, since many of these peoples, the first victims of Columbus's colonizing missions, were annihilated, enslaved, and deported, or later assimilated enslaved African populations with the advent of the Atlantic slave trade. The best known are the Caribs, Arawaks, Taínos, and the Chibchan-speaking peoples. Throughout the Caribbean islands and rim are also descendants of Maroons, mixed indigenous and African communities who successfully liberated themselves from slavery, such as the Garifuna people, Black Caribs along the coast of the Western Caribbean. From the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and south to the Gulf of Mexico lay one of the most fertile agricultural belts in the world, crisscrossed with great rivers, naturally watered, teeming with plant and animal life, temperate in climate. the region was home to multiple agricultural nations. In the 12th century, the Mississippi Valley region was marked by one enormous city-state, Cahokia, and several large ones built of earthen stepped pyramids, much like those in Mexico. Cahokia supported a population of tens of thousands, larger than that of London during the same period. Other architectural monuments were sculpted in the shape of gigantic birds, lizards, bears, alligators, and even a 1,330-foot-long serpent. These feats of monumental construction testify to the levels of civic and social organization. Called mound builders by European settlers, the people of this civilization had dispersed before the European invasion, but their influence had spread throughout the eastern half of the North American continent through cultural influence and trade. What European colonizers found in the southeastern region of the continent were nations of villages with economies based on agriculture and corn the mainstay. This was the territory of the nations of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, and the Muskogee Creek and Seminole, along with the Natchez Nation in the western part, the Mississippi Valley region. To the north, a remarkable federal state structure, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, often referred to as the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, was made up of the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk nations, and from early in the 19th century, the Tuscaroras. This system incorporated 6 widely dispersed and unique nations of thousands of agricultural villages and hunting grounds from the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic, and as far south as the Carolinas and inland to Pennsylvania. The Haudenosaunee peoples avoided centralized power by means of a clan-village system of democracy based on collective stewardship of the land. Corn, the staple crop, was stored in granaries and distributed equitably in this matrilineal society by the clan mothers, the oldest women from every extended family. Many other nations flourished in the Great Lakes region where now the U.S.-Canada border cuts through their realms. Among them, the Anishinaabe Nation, called by others Ojibwe and Chippewa, was the largest. The peoples of the prairies of central North America spanned an expanse of space from West Texas to the subarctic between the Mississippi Valley and Rocky Mountains. That's pretty huge. Several centers of development in that vast region of farming and bison-dependent peoples may be identified. In the prairies of Canada, the Crees. In the Dakotas, the Lakota and Dakota Sioux. And to their west and south, the Cheyenne and Arapaho peoples. Farther south were the Ponca, Pawnee, Osage, Kiowa, and many other nations, with Buffalo numbering 60 million. Territorial disputes inevitably occurred, and diplomatic skills as well as trade were highly developed for conflict resolution. In the Pacific Northwest, from present-day Alaska to San Francisco and along the vast inland waterways to the mountain barriers, great seafaring and fishing peoples flourished, linked by culture, common ceremonies, and extensive trade. These were wealthy peoples living in a comparative paradise of natural resources, including the sacred salmon. They invented the potlatch, the ceremonial distribution of or destruction of accumulated goods, creating a culture of reciprocity. They crafted gigantic wooden totems, masks, and lodges carved from giant sequoias and redwoods. Among these communities speaking many languages were the Tlingit people in Alaska and the salmon fishing Salish, Makah, Hupa, Pomo, Karok, and Yurok people. The territory between the Sierra Nevada and Rocky Mountains in the west, now called the Great Basin, was a harsh environment that supported small populations before European colonization as it does today, yet the Shoshone, Bannock, Paiute, and Ute peoples there managed the environment and built permanent villages. Governance. Each indigenous nation or city-state or town comprised an independent, self-governing people that held supreme authority over internal affairs and dealt with other peoples on equal footing. Among the factors that integrated each nation, in addition to language, were shared belief systems and rituals and clans of extended families that spanned more than one town. The system of decision-making was based on consensus, not majority rule. This form of decision-making later baffled colonial agents who could not find indigenous officials to bribe or manipulate. In terms of international diplomacy, each of the indigenous peoples of Western North America was a sovereign nation. First the Spanish, French, and British colonizers, and then the U.S. colonizers made treaties with these indigenous governments. Indigenous governance varied widely in form. East of the Mississippi River, towns and federations of towns were governed by family lineages. The male elder of the most powerful clan was the executive. His ascension to that position and all his decisions were subject to the approval of a council of elders of the clans that were represented in the town. In this manner, the town had sovereign authority over its internal affairs. In each sovereign town burned a sacred fire symbolizing its relationship with the spirit beings. A town could join other towns under the leadership of a single leader. English colonists termed such groupings of towns confederacies. Confederacies plural. Last half of that didn't come out of my mouth. Or federations. Same deal. The Haudenosaunee people today retain a fully functioning government of this type. It was the Haudenosaunee Constitution called the Great Law of Peace that inspired essential elements of the U.S. Constitution. Oren Lyons, who holds the title of Faith Keeper of the Turtle Clan and is a member of the Onondaga Council of Chiefs, explains the essence of that constitution. The first principle is peace. The second principle, equity, justice for the people. And third, the power of the good minds, of the collective powers to be of one mind, unity, and health. All of these were involved in the basic principles and the process of discussion, putting aside warfare as a method of reaching decisions and now using intellect. The Muskogees, Creeks, Seminoles, and other peoples in the southeast had three branches of government: a civil administration, a military, and a branch that dealt with the sacred. The leaders of each branch were drawn from the elite, and other officials were drawn from prominent clans. Over the centuries preceding European colonialism, ancient traditions of diplomacy had developed among the indigenous nations. Societies in the eastern part of the continent had an elaborate ceremonial structure for diplomatic meetings among representatives of disparate governments. In the federations of sovereign towns, the leading town's fire represented the entire group, and each member town sent a representative or two to the federation's council. Thus, everyone in the Federation was represented in the government's decision-making. Agreements reached in such meetings were considered sacred pledges that the representatives made not only to one another but also to the powerful spirit looking on. The nations tended to hold firm to such treaties out of respect for the sacred power that was party to the agreements. Relations with the spirit world were thus a major factor in government. The roles of women varied among the societies of eastern North America. Among the Muskogees and other southern nations, women hardly participated in government affairs. Haudenosaunee and Cherokee women, on the other hand, held more political authority. Among the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, Senecas, and Tuscaroras, certain female lineages controlled the choice of male representatives for their clans in their governing councils. Men were the representatives, but the women who chose them had the right to speak in the council, and when the chosen representative was too young or inexperienced to be effective, one of the women might participate in council on his behalf. Wonder how they make that decision, what the age cutoff is. Haudenosaunee clan mothers held the power to recall unsatisfactory representatives. Charles C. Mann, author of 1491 New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus, calls it a feminist dream. According to the value system that drove consensus building and decision making in these societies, the community's interest overrode individual interests. After every member of a council had had his or her say, any member who still considered a decision incorrect might nevertheless agree to abide by it for the sake of the community's cohesion. In the rare cases in which consensus could not be reached, the segment of the community represented by dissenters might withdraw from the community and move away to found a new community. This was similar to the practice of the nearly 100 autonomous towns of northern New Mexico. Stewards of the land. By the time of European invasions, indigenous peoples had occupied and shaped every part of the Americas, established extensive trade networks and roads, and were sustaining their populations by adapting to specific natural environments. But they also adapted nature to suit human ends. Mann relates how indigenous peoples used fire to shape and tame the pre-colonial North American landscape. In the Northeast, indigenous farmers always carried flints. One English observer in 1637 noted that they used the flints to set fire of the country in all places where they come. They also used torches for night hunting and rings of flame to encircle animals to kill. Rather than domesticating animals for hides and meat, indigenous communities created havens to attract deer, elk, bear, and other game. They burned the undergrowth in forests so that the young grasses and other ground cover that sprouted the following spring would entice greater numbers of herbivores and the predators that fed on them, which would sustain the people who ate them both. That's really smart. Mann describes these forests in 1491. Rather than the thick, unbroken, monumental snarl of trees imagined by Thoreau, the great eastern forest was an ecological kaleidoscope of garden plots, blackberry brambles, pine barrens, and spacious groves of chestnut, hickory, and oak. Inland a few miles from the shore of present-day Rhode Island, an early European explorer marveled at the trees that were spaced so that the forest could be penetrated even by a large army. English mercenary John Smith wrote that he had ridden a galloping horse through the Virginia forest. In Ohio, the first English squatters on indigenous lands in the mid 18th century encountered forested areas that resembled English parks as they could drive carriages through the trees. Bison herds roamed the east from New York to Georgia. It's no accident that a settler city in western New York was named Buffalo. The American bison was indigenous to the northern and southern plains in North America, not the east, yet native peoples imported them east along a path of fire as they transformed forest into fallows for the bison to survive upon far from their original habitat. It's really interesting. Historian William Cronin has written that when the Haudenosaunee hunted buffalo, they were harvesting a foodstuff which they had consciously been instrumental in creating. As for the Great American Desert, as Anglo-Americans called the Great Plains, the occupants transformed that too into game farms. Using fire, they extended the giant grasslands and maintained them. When Lewis and Clark began their trek up the Missouri River in 1804, ethnologist Dale Lott has observed they beheld not a wilderness but a vast pasture managed by and for Native Americans. Native Americans created the world's largest gardens and grazing lands, and thrived. Native peoples left an indelible imprint on the land with systems of roads that tied nations and communities together across the entire landmass of the Americas. Scholar David Wade Chambers writes, "The first thing to note about early Native American trails and roads is that they were not just paths in the woods following along animal tracks used mainly for hunting. Neither can they be characterized simply as the routes that nomadic peoples followed during seasonal migrations. Rather, they constituted an extensive system of roadways that spanned the Americas, making possible short, medium, and long-distance travel. That is to say, the pre-Columbian Americas were laced together with a complex system of roads and paths which became the roadways adopted by the early settlers and indeed were ultimately transformed into major highways." Bet you didn't know that. Roads were developed along rivers, and many indigenous roads in North America tracked the Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri, Columbia, and Colorado rivers, the Rio Grande, and other major streams. Roads also followed sea coasts. A major road ran along the Pacific coast from northern Alaska, where travelers could continue by boat to Siberia, south to an urban area in western Mexico. A branch of that road ran through the Sonora Desert and up onto the Colorado Plateau, serving ancient towns and later communities such as those of the Hopis and Pueblos on the northern Rio Grande. From the Pueblo communities, roads eastward carried travelers onto the semi-arid plains along tributaries of the Pecos River and up to the communities in what is now eastern New Mexico, the Texas Panhandle, and West Texas. There were also roads from the northern Rio Grande to the southern plains of western Oklahoma by way of the Canadian and Cimarron rivers. The roads along those rivers and their tributaries led to a system of roads that followed rivers from the southeast. They also connected with ones that turned southwestward toward the Valley of Mexico. The eastern roads connected Muskogee Creek towns in present-day Georgia and Alabama. From the Muskogee towns, a major route led north through Cherokee lands, the Cumberland Gap, and the Shenandoah Valley region to the confluence of the Ohio and Scioto rivers. I almost wanted to pronounce that word in an Italian way. but it wouldn't be Italian. From the northeastern part of the continent, a traveler could reach the west coast by following roads along the Ohio River to the Mississippi, up the Mississippi to the mouth of the Missouri, and along the Missouri westward to its headwaters. From there, a road crossed the Rocky Mountains through South Pass in present-day Wyoming and led to the Colorado River. The Columbia River, led to the Columbia River. Did I say Colorado River? The Columbia River Road led to the large population center at the river's mouth on the Pacific Ocean and connected with the Pacific Coast Road. I can't help but wonder if that Pacific Coast Road became Highway 101. I live in that area. I mean, not that close, but, pretty close. An hour and a half, 2 hours. Corn. North America in 1492 was not a virgin wilderness, but a network of indigenous nations, peoples of the corn. Sounds like a Stephen King movie. The link between peoples of the North and the South can be seen in the diffusion of corn from Mesoamerica. Both Muskogees and Cherokees, whose original homelands in North America are located in the southeast, trace their lineage to migration from or through Mexico. Cherokee historian Emmett Starr wrote, "The Cherokees most probably preceded by several hundred years the Muskogees in their exodus from Mexico and swung in a wider circle, crossing the Mississippi River many miles north of the mouth of the Missouri River, as indicated by the mounds. The Muskogees were probably driven out of Mexico by the Aztecs, Toltecs, or some other of the northwestern tribal invasions of the 9th or preceding centuries. This is evidenced by the customs and devices that were long retained by the Creeks." Another Cherokee writer, Robert Conley, tells about the oral tradition that claims Cherokee origins in South America and subsequent migration through Mexico. Later, with U.S. military invasions and relocations of the Muskogee and Cherokee peoples, many groups split off and sought refuge in Mexico, as did others under pressure, such as the Kickapoos. Although practiced traditionally throughout the indigenous agricultural areas of North America, the green corn dance remains strongest among the Muskogee people. The elements of the ritual dance are similar to those of the Valley of Mexico, although the dance takes various forms among different communities. The core of it is the same, a commemoration of the gift of corn by an ancestral corn woman. The peoples of the corn retain great affinities under the crust of colonialism. This brief overview of pre-colonial North America suggests the magnitude of what was lost to all humanity and counteracts the settler colonial myth of the wandering Neolithic hunter. These were civilizations based on advanced agriculture and featuring polities. It is essential to understand the migrations and indigenous peoples' relationships prior to invasion, north and south, and how colonialism cut them off. But, as we will see, the relationships are being reestablished. That's the end of chapter 1. Hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time, and thanks for joining me.